This morning I'm at the Oxenford Weir, just south of Brisbane, to photograph the bird life that you can see in this video here, which is the Little Egret and the Pelican. They're not too far from the Weir, so I can get good photos. This morning I'm testing out my new setup for taking photos and video with my Z6II, which consists of the ARTCISE AS80C carbon fiber tripod and a LEOFOTO two-way tilt head. I'm finding this new setup is much lighter than my old setup, and it is a breeze and so easy to catch photos and especially video of the birds. It's very stable and it's much lighter than my old setup. And I'll put a link to it here comparing the two setups. So this is my camera settings for the Z6II this morning. I'm in continuous high, shooting at 5.5 frames per second. My autofocus mode is single point and the metering is center weighted. Now I normally shoot in dynamic area AF for my autofocus mode, but I'm shooting in single point AF because of this situation here. You can see there's white water in the foreground from the water going over the weir, and I found in dynamic area AF the autofocus switches back and forwards between the bird and the white water, and I've had this problem in the past, so I've found that single point is much more reliable than dynamic area AF. The bird was having a field day catching small fish here in this area. So after taking a few photos of the egret, I switched over to video mode, and in video mode I prefer to use wide area AF small and center weighted for this bird here. This is the beauty of the Z6II. It's that it has three programmable modes: U1, U2, U3. U2 for me I have set up for my wildlife photography. In photo mode I have specific settings and I can quickly change to video on the camera, and my video mode is automatically set. So I've got my two best settings for photos and video, so it's very easy to swap from video to photo mode, and whatever mode you were in and you'd set up, it remembers the settings. But if you turn the camera off and turn it back on, it goes back to the settings that you had preset in those modes. But as long as you're just swapping on the day between photo and video, whatever settings you were using previously, it remembers those settings. See, the egret was just having a ball catching these little fish here. It was just on the edge of the white water, and little fish just moving away from the white water were easy picking for this egret. I swapped over the autofocus mode from single point to dynamic area AF here because there was no white water around the pelican, and I knew that I'd get better autofocusing results with dynamic area AF. And he just lunged into the water here trying to catch a fish. You see all the photos were in focus. Even at 5.5 frames per second, you can still get great photos. And I don't think that I missed any of the action shots. Then he had finished and decided to preen itself. Now I decided to photograph the little egret again. I'd left it in dynamic area AF, swapped it to spot metering to show you the problems with dynamic area AF when there is foreground detail that the camera can actually lock into. And you can see here the camera's focused in on the foreground, it jumps back to the background, very unreliable. So in wide area AF small, sometimes the camera locked into the foreground. I just had to bear that, but I found spot focus was just too difficult with a moving bird, so I just settled that the bird every now and then for a split second would be out of focus, but the video was still very good. Even though I was concentrating on the little egret and the pelican this morning, I couldn't resist the temptation of photographing this greater crested tern as it kept swooping down trying to catch some fish. So now I'm in wide area AF small, so I can track this bird as it's moving along, and my metering is in center weighted. And you can see most of these photos are in focus. They are heavily cropped. This is only about a third of the size of the image. I've still got a lot of detail on these photos. I'm very happy how crisp these photos are, even though they're very cropped in. And this is how quick the action happens at 5.5 frames per second. And Mr. Pelican here in video swooped down, After many attempts, caught a fish and was very happy with this. Now this next set of this pelican catching a large fish was still taken at 5.5 frames per second in dynamic area AF and center weighted. And you can see how the action happens so quickly even at 5.5 frames per second, and none of these 27 photos were out of focus. Now here's each frames one at a time, and you can see that yes, I am missing a couple of shots compared to my Nikon D500 when I was shooting at 8 frames per second, but I'm still getting some very nice action shots of this pelican as he's catching this fish and swallowing it. I know the Z6II takes a lot of flack for being only at 5.5 frames per second and the autofocus not being that good, but I feel you just have to learn the different autofocus modes and choosing the right autofocus mode for your situation. And this is the key to using the Z6II for bird photography, because not all autofocus modes will work in every situation. And this is what I'm learning the more and more that I'm using this camera. As you can see, the Nikon Z6II is still a great bird photographer's camera. I've paired it with my Nikon 200-500 and I am very happy with this setup. Yes, I can only shoot at 5.5 frames per second because I found shooting in continuous high extended at 14 frames per second, I am missing too many shots. So I'd prefer just to shoot at 5.5 frames per second unless the bird is near stationary. If the bird is near stationary, I will go to extended continuous and shoot at 14 frames per second. But for scenes like this pelican taking off, swooping down, catching this fish, I still prefer it shooting at 5.5 frames per second because I know that my success rate is going to be at least 85 to 90%. And I'm very happy with this. So thanks for watching. If you've got any questions or feedback, leave it in the comment box below. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do. Stay safe. I'll see you next time.